What's up, everybody? Welcome, welcome, welcome. It is Wednesday. That means it's Physio Wednesday here at Unity Gym and the Unified Movement System. Before we get started, if this is the first time joining us, allow me to introduce the team, the dream team. My name is Yanni Burmeister. Below me is Richard Lellies. We are Unity Gym and the Unified Movement System. And of course, we are graced by the effervescent Phil White from ADPT Physio, joining us from his surf hut in Manly. How are you, Phil?
I am well. I'm feeling good. It's been 2 weeks post my first marathon. I feel like my body feels almost back to normal. Things are looking up.
I can't believe you did that. And so today we're continuing on our discussion that we launched yesterday about how to increase strength and flexibility. Yesterday we spoke about what we do first. We lifted the curtains and showed you inside Unity Gym and the Unified Movement System. The first three phases of our Unified Movement System are technique optimization. We do that through a series of fundamental movement patterns that are the biggest bang for your buck movements that are going to deliver strength, and the same for flexibility that you can deploy into any sport, into anything that you want to do. We even talked about the fact that this is a very important part of a weight loss program. So if anyone's watching who is like, yeah, well, that doesn't appeal to me because, or apply to me because I'm trying to lose some weight. No, that's completely wrong. You need to stimulate muscle tissue when you're in a weight loss program to maintain your muscle tissue and keep your healthy metabolism. So it's very, very important that you introduce a bit of resistance training to a good weight loss program, as well as your cardio and your diet. And so technique optimization is going to be of benefit to you too. Now, today, and what we promised yesterday is that we were going to get Phil on to discuss this because a lot of our methods have been sort of, what would I call, inspired by watching the guys from ADPT Physio work with their patients and clients. And they have a similar ethos. They do a lot outside on the gym floor to optimize technique. And I spoke yesterday about how we have a private group that our members get access to, and they post videos of themselves doing these fundamental movements so that we can give them the coach's eye perspective and we can look at them and give them feedback as though we were in the room with them. And, as far as I know, and to my knowledge, and I think we'll learn a bit more about that now, Phil has a very similar technique. So, Phil, what do you guys do? How do you do it at ADPT Physio? And do you think that this is still the best way to go rather than sort of assessing or over assessing in the beginning and getting a lot of data and selectively choosing what you prescribe someone based on that data? Do you still sort of focus on keeping things simple in the beginning?
Yeah, I think now like physio and training like principles are going to be slightly separate. So with physiotherapy, there's like it's essential to do a fair amount of assessment for the kind of diagnostic side of figuring out what the injury is, what it likes, what it doesn't like, and just make like screening for sort of red flags. So there are certain assessments that are a really good idea to do with physiotherapy, but people are often surprised that a lot of the information actually comes from the subjective assessment, which is the questions asked at the beginning, and the objective assessment. So some of the movements and tests are often more of just a confirming rather than discovery. So it kind of surprises people a little bit. But yeah, when it comes to training and assessment, it was a discussion that we've had over the years of where I see like past Yanni was a massive assessor, would do pages and pages and pages of every movement test under the sun to figure out look for imbalances and look for all sorts of movement deficiencies in the body. And I know I've had patients come to me where they've been working with trainers who give me this massive like almanac of every movement. And the issue with that, and the issue with especially when you're at the beginning of your training journey, is if you're over assessing but you haven't got the fundamental skills and knowledge down, then you sort of get a lot of not very useful information. And that's super time consuming, which can be really costly if you're working with a professional to do this testing, but also it can just be like confusing and overwhelming for people and put them off the most important thing, which is training. because I think a lot of people fall into the trap of thinking that if they're not doing a quote unquote perfect workout that's exactly tailored towards them and like is really specific to exactly their body, that they're not going to get good results. But what's been shown again and again and again is that like the simple things done consistently is what gets the best results, and putting up barriers of overassessment can end up stifling that for a lot of people because they just can't get past the the testing phase. So that's
What I want to
kind of
add
part
to
one.
that very quickly is that what I've seen is that it tends to, and just very quickly before I go further, I should say that at Unity Gym we have a big pre-exercise questionnaire that everyone has to complete before they start exercising with us, which goes through injury and all sorts of stuff like that. So that which is kind of what Phil said there. It's a questionnaire, and they do that before they even get on a consultation call with us. It's part of the booking process. But and that way we can determine if there's any red flags and anything like that, and even potentially refer them on to ADPT physio if they need to, if they've got an existing issue that goes beyond our scope of practice. Uh, but after that, what I was going to add was what I've noticed through doing this myself. Remember, I've been a personal trainer for almost 20 years, since 2004, so 18 years, yeah. And for the first probably 8 years, I would call an over assessor. You know, I was a bit unsure of myself, and I went down a path of training where you tested everything. You know, and for the first few months of someone's training, they were just trying to activate their pelvic floor and TA and core and things like that, and there was a lot of laying down and doing these basic exercises. But what I found is that those people, it kind of pigeonholes you. And now that I know a lot more about psychology and pain science and things like that, which largely I've learned through the people that I've interviewed on our podcast, and then I've gone down the rabbit hole of reading and researching a little bit more. But I sort of get it now. You know, when you put someone through there and you hold a mirror up and you show them the 99 things that they've got wrong with their body, they lose confidence, and then that is a cycle where they feel like they're too compromised to do the exercise that everyone else is doing, and they end up for years and years and years staying in that place of I'm compromised, therefore I can't do the things that other people do, and then that limits, that limits what they can achieve. And this happened to me personally after falling off the horse and hurting my back when I was a kid. I was told by so many different experts that I had a compromised spine and that I would probably never be able to do certain things. And I never tried them as a result. I never tried to deadlift. I never tried to squat. I was scared of those exercises. And then it's funnily, you know, and I've shared this story a lot, it became the most sort of complex snatch grip deficit deadlift that seemed to be the breakthrough exercise for me. And it was only through a years and years and years of frustration that I decided, well, I've got nothing to lose. I'm not getting better with what I'm doing, so let's just try something different. And I did it, and lo and behold, my back problems are a thing of the past. You know, what do you think about that, Phil?
Yeah, I think that like that injury identity piece kind of plays a large part of it, because I know that so many people who come into me as physio patients sort of have had these like super in-depth assessments before and are sort of disqualifying themselves from certain sports activities or movements because of this past assessment. And while I understand where that's coming from, and there is some like, and again, I'm not saying that all assessments are bad. I think it's just like picking when and what's useful information and maybe what's not so useful information. The problem with that is when people come in, they don't really understand like that. Then mentally, yeah, it makes them think like, oh, I can never do X, Y, or Z because of this past assessment. Whereas when you have a better understanding of just the way, like the ways you can change variables to facilitate movement, then and that's going to be intensity, volume, range of motion, speed, complexity. So like having that ability to be able to shift things slightly will then facilitate people doing what they want to be able to do. Now, I think the next thing to talk about is probably why assessment, particularly at the beginning of a training block, like especially if you're new to training, might not be the most useful thing, because a lot of people come in and we're all individual snowflakes. We're all our own, four-leaf clover. We think that, everything has to be exactly tailored to us, and what works for other people won't work. Like that's a very common thing, and even, like we all fall into that trap ourselves a bit. But I think the key thing to understand is, like most of us, obviously there's some disabilities where this isn't true, but most of us have two arms, two legs, and a spine, and there are certain fundamental movements like pushing and pulling and squatting and hinging that all bodies do, and the way in which your body will do that is going to be pretty similar to the next person. So uh, there's going to be movement variability between people, but the fundamental movements are going to be the same between each person. So if we then fall into the trap of thinking like every program has to be so customized to have like certain things for certain people, then you can end up just again overcomplicating things, like feeling like there's some silver bullet exercise that's going to unlock everything for you, but really doing the simple things consistently is what gets the good results. So I know that's probably a bit frustrating and confronting for some people, but like it is one of the hard truths to realize that it's like we often look to complicate things when really that's a procrastination just to do what we need to do. And I've fallen into that
Yeah.
trap so many times.
Yeah, and yesterday I mentioned this, and one of the things that I feel really strongly about now is that you feel as though you need specific exercises when really in reality, I mean, there's gonna be different ways that your body interprets a movement. The movement's the same, and if you perfect or optimize the movement, it's gonna benefit in the same way as the next person. You might have a postural type or an adaptation to your body where you've been sitting in a chair for ages and you've sort of lost a little bit of neural connection or strength in certain areas of the body. So your interpretation of a movement might be a little bit different when you first start, but that doesn't mean that optimizing that movement isn't going to benefit you in the same way that it benefited me, And what I think people need to understand is that rather than needing a personalized, customized, brilliantly designed, unique to the next person series of exercises, what they need is the coach's eye to look at them, look at how their body's interpreting that movement, and correct the things that are not right. But they'll be doing the same exact movement. It might mean that they need to do a slightly different foot position in the squat to suit their hips or to suit their current state of mobility. It might mean that they are better off doing a sumo stance deadlift for the time being, or a rack pull deadlift for the time being, where they're not pulling off the floor, entirely. It may mean that they need to do eccentrically loaded chin ups for a while because they don't have the strength to pull themselves up, or whatever it is. But what I would like to press upon people is that it's not the uniqueness of the series of exercises that's going to be special for you. It's having the right person look at how you're interpreting the movements and correcting uh, things that you might be doing incorrectly. And it's no different to learning how to ride a bicycle or learning how to throw a frisbee. Phil and I go. Phil's a somewhat retired professional frisbee player. Would you call
Very
it?
retired and not professional. I never got paid, unfortunately, but
Okay, all right. But
I've internationally represented.
he was extremely good at throwing a frisbee. That's all you need to know. Now, if Phil and I go down to the park and we throw a frisbee to one another, his interpretation of throwing a frisbee is going to look a lot better than mine. And most likely he'll be able to throw it about 4 or 5 times further than me. Now, that doesn't mean that the idea of throwing a frisbee should change. That doesn't mean that I need a different way to throw the frisbee. No, Phil just needs to show me how to throw the damn frisbee properly. And the same goes for going to the gym and learning how to do fundamental movements like the squat, like the deadlift. And unfortunately, what people tend to do is, rather than have someone show them how to do it properly and correct what they may be not quite understanding, or their body isn't interpreting correctly, uh, they go and try and shortcut it and go, well, I'll just go and sit in this leg press or leg extension instead because it's going to hit the same muscles. Um, and I just can't be bothered. The squatting isn't for me. That's that's out of my ability because I'm compromised. And that's like the worst thing to do because most likely learning how to do that movement is going to be the best thing for your body.
Yeah. And just on the exercise selection side of things, so we've talked a lot here about, I guess, following, like, not stressing too much about exercise selection. When it does become important is going to be when you're specializing towards a certain point. But that's typically like going to be much further down your sort of, like, if you haven't done a good fundamental block of like basic preparation, then the specialization kind of doesn't become as necessary. So, like, we're not saying here that, all programs should be the same and everyone just has to get good technique. Like, but for most people, the barrier to them progressing is the overcomplication and the feeling like they need to have this over specialization before they've got the fundamentals down. So I just wanted to highlight that, like, obviously specialization, exercise selection is key for maximal sport, like, to really be the top of your game in a sport. But I think if you're reaching for that before you've got your general preparation and fundamental stuff down, then that can be where you end up
That's a
wasting
that
time.
That's a really good point because what I believe now, after doing this for 18 years, is that the more advanced you get, the more important the assessment process becomes. But the funny thing is, there's this inverse relationship where you become so well versed in exercise selection that you self assess. And I'm sure Richard can relate to this too. Like, Richard and I don't tend to do our comprehensive strength tests that we have in the UMS for our advanced guys, because we actually are benchmarking constantly and figuring out, okay, I am now becoming more proficient in a flat bench press. I need to focus a bit more on incline bench press, and you rotate the exercises based on the performance of your prior program phase. And the more advanced you get, I don't believe someone like a professional powerlifter or whatever needs to go through a week of testing. They would go, okay, it's time I need to do something this or introduce this, or so the more advanced you get, the more important it becomes, but the less you actually need to self-assess because you're doing it constantly. You know, but what we find is after about the first 12 months or 12 program phases, it becomes really important to self-assess and do strength tests because then you start to be able to identify the things that you may have neglected. Uh, and it happens a little bit. There's this period of time, I think, in one's training age where you start to favor the exercises you can see real good improvements in. And it's just something that you enjoy it because there's nothing more liberating than seeing your strength go up in a primary lift like a bench press or squat. And when you start to see that happening, you want to do it more. Naturally, you want to do the things that you're getting a great feeling from. But then you get to a point where you realize, wow, you can't run towards something without running away from something else. So you start to do more of one thing, you neglect something else. And that's when the strength testing and structural balance testing becomes really, really important. And by that stage, you're proficient in these fundamental movements. So the data you get is very specific and absolutely tangible and deployable. You can use that to create very effective, very specific programs for your needs. Whereas in the beginning, when the most important part, once you've eliminated red flags and you've got that baseline of pre-exercise, data, it just becomes really, really important to optimize technique in these fundamental movements and increase your strength and flexibility and fitness in balance so that, you've created a great foundation and platform to then sort of deploy into the specialization area that you're planning to go in, whether it's to play a sport or whether it's just to continue getting strong, flexible, fit, whatever it is.
Yeah, and it is that thing with at the beginning when you're testing, like, as a health practitioner, I can kind of, I've noticed that sometimes assessment is almost like psychologically weaponized against patients to sort of, like, almost add a, like, guru element to some health practitioners where they'll sort of Like
Yep.
there's just all these sort of like there's these ways in which that you can I guess change a little thing and then show some big improvement and then say that's like, and then practitioners will use that as a reason why you then have to come back like 8 times in the first 6 weeks to like, because they've sort of used this, just suggestion and different, there's all these like other non-treatment effects of the interaction that can just, end up changing things quite quickly. And then if that's not communicated in a ideal way, or maybe not even an honest way, then that can be really quite problematic. And I don't know, this is a whole like, big discussion that we probably don't have time for, but I think just the understanding that at the beginning, when you're really fresh to something, like small changes will have big impacts on the amount, like for a strength assessment, for example, when you're doing a more complicated movement than, just say a bicep curl, like the way in which you do it is going to really matter. So if you test that same person twice and they may have wildly different results just based on like, something that the patient is not aware of just because of like a slight technique change. But that focus on technique optimization will mean that the variation for each time you do it will decrease. And that once you don't have much variation in how you do something, that's where the information you get becomes really useful, because now we have like a true representation of your strength at that stage with good technique. Whereas before that, like when I first started squatting and I just had no idea how to provide tension, provide tension in my upper body, each time I squatted, like sometimes it would kind of work and I wouldn't really know why, and then other times the same weight would feel like it was crushing me, and I was like, I don't know what's going on here. Like, can I just not squat? And then after good coaching, then when I started to do squat like testing, it was useful because it was a true representation of strength increase. So that's an example.
And this is why, and what we'll finish on in a sec, and I'm going to throw it to you, Richie, because I notice that you do this a lot in your training when we used to train together at Unity Gym, is why recording yourself while you're training, and whether it's, Richard's in a position where he can analyze his own movement and really know what's going on there, but why it's so important to have a coach's eye look at you, especially when you're going through this initial phase of technique optimization. But I've noticed you do that a lot, Richie. You film yourself. What training and is that for review?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, everybody needs a coach, right? Everybody needs that second set of eyes to look at them to see whether they're doing it right. And when you're in the moment of actually doing it, you can't see those things. Sometimes you can't even feel those things. So, videoing yourself is just, and because I have the knowledge of what technique should look like and all the variables to that, I think it's valuable, and that's why we definitely recommend it to everybody when they're training to have a second set of eyes or film themselves, because it's you can actually change what you see, but when you're actually doing it, like I said, you can't see it. So how are you going to change something you're not aware of?
It's hilarious because since the invention of these things, everyone's got access to what used to cost a truckload of money. You used to have to go to a sports performance clinic. I don't know if you remember this, Phil. Maybe you were too young, but you used to be able to go to a sports performance clinic, and a lot of the time they were operated by physios or exercise physiologists, and they had, cameras set up like what I've got filming, like an expensive camera, and they'd film you running or film you doing exercises and then analyze it and show you, what you were doing right and wrong. And you can still sort of do that, but now everyone's got access to that here. You don't actually need to go into a special clinic, a specialist clinic to do it, and we always talk about these little Joby Gorilla Pods that we recommend people get, because you can bend them and wrap them around the squat racks or set them up on the ground and get a better angle. And that's what we get our tribe to use, so that we can give them the best possible coaching available. And these things, for a top here that you put your phone in and the legs, they're about $30 on Amazon. And then you've got a coach's eye looking at you, and of course the next step is to have someone who knows what they're doing review. But even yourself looking at it, you're going to be able to look at a video that you've learned from on YouTube or wherever you're getting your exercise ideas from, and then video it and see what your body's interpretation of that movement actually looks like. Now, Phil, you have a system. Let's hear about your system.
Well, I was going to say what I really like about the UMS programs group on the Wednesday coaching calls, and then the coaching group. Like, I love the people who sit in there and they get the feedback on their own video, but then they stick around and watch the rest, because by learning this learning how to, see the differences in exercise. Because I know when you first start out, like, you look at someone, analyzing a movement, you're like, I don't see the differences there. But once you get practice in it and you see lots of different people doing that movement, you'll start to pick up little differences. And I love those people who sit in and watch the whole coaching call, because they're developing that kind of ability to coach themselves. And my number one goal with all my patients is to make them as self-sustainable as quickly as possible. And I think that ability to be able to watch your own videos and be able to pick up on those little things becomes just that's what makes you just really succeed long term, is being able to build that knowledge around your own training to identify these things. I still think that there's a reason why top athletes in the world have coaches, because having coaches is always going to be the best way to do it. But if you can build up that level of kind of coaching literacy yourself to watch and assess yourself, then that's going to be great. And that's what I really love about a lot of those people in the coaching group, is they get really into it. But yeah, Yanni, to your point, the group that I'm actually launching today, which is exciting because it's been in the works for a while, is not going to be the same as UMS Movement Mastermind. I love the groups that you guys have where people post their training and their exercise wins and everything like that. But I'm actually starting a group which is a physio accountability group. And why I started it is I've really noticed that with myself and a lot of people like me, we have all the motivation in the world to do hard exercise. I just trained for a marathon, was out running 6 days a week for over an hour every session. I've done sessions where I was training. When I first started Unity Gym, I was training, I was doing double day or triple kind of sessions with my mate Alex for 5 days a week, and got in the shape of my life and was really, I have zero issue with motivation when it comes to training hard. Played international sport for quite a while, but when it comes to doing the little things, those little exercises that you need to do, and maybe the stuff that the physio has suggested you do for maybe 2 weeks and then fall off the bandwagon. It's those little things that often become the limiting factor when you really want to perform. So I really noticed in my marathon, for example, everything felt good, except as I started to get towards that 25, 30K mark, all these old niggles started to become really problematic. And they're not going to be so bad during your training sessions that they stop you, but when you get to that hard competition, that can be a real limiting factor. So basically with this group, the idea is that each day you post doing those little, maybe, not so glamorous exercises that you need to do, but really do. And then you get rewarded for it. So basically each post becomes a raffle ticket. And then at the end of the week, I draw a raffle, which is going to be free treatment, both in the clinic, but also sessions online. And then if you get sort of month-long streaks, and there's going to be some discount rewards as well. So just trying to incentivize and almost gamify doing that stuff, which is massive for injury prevention long-term. And that's going to be partly healthy habits around recovery, as well as healthy habits around your exercise. But then, hopefully making a community of people who also you learn from each other, seeing what other people are doing, and then on there also be doing Q&As and the like. So yeah, that's
sounds awesome. So
that's
what
cool,
we
man.
might do is invite everyone watching. We'll throw a link into the description of this video so that you can find Phil's group. As soon as you've got it, you
and otherwise
need to give
look
it
up
to Richard.
ADPT Physio Accountability Group on Facebook groups, and you'll be able to find it there.
There you go, ADPT Physio Accountability. And yeah, it sounds amazing. Sounds awesome. I think it's a really good idea. I know firsthand, I've had a couple of surgical interventions where I had to do rehab, and it's very, very hard to motivate yourself, especially when you come from a place like me where you're used to squatting 180 kilos and then you've got to, sit on the ground and flex your quad. And but it's so important. It's so important that you do it.
Yeah.
All right, guys, that's all we've got time for. Yep.
Yeah, and just quickly before we wrap up, I know we're slightly over time, but this is really coming from a place where in my degree, the thing that we were told right at the beginning is that the most known thing about physio is that people get exercise and then don't do it. And most practices will go about trying to solve that problem by booking people in, 8 times in 6 weeks to force them into doing it. But I'm trying to give people, again, that power to do it themselves. So that's what the group is all about. So jump on board.
Awesome. All right, guys, we got to jump in and give our coaching to the UMS programs and coaching group today. So we will see you all tomorrow. We're going to continue this discussion and we're going to introduce the fundamental movements that we've been talking about over the last 2 days. Richie and I are going to take a deep dive into explaining why these movements are so beneficial for developing strength and flexibility. So tune in tomorrow. Otherwise, we will see you soon. Take care.
Oh.
Thanks, Phil.